Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Izard. I'm the General Manager of the Canadian Wood Pallet Container Association, and today we're doing a safety group webinar on ergonomic assessments. So as a backgrounder, roughly 40% of the accidents that occur within the pallet and container industry across Canada, that's BC or Ontario or Quebec, are related to a ergonomic injury. And that basically is where the difference would be where instead of a cut or a crush injury, you receive a strain to some part of your body, strain to your lower back, strain in the shoulder, arm, something like that. So that's what we're talking about. It's one of the most requested topics from employers to try and get a handle on. Okay, so we're going to talk about just as as an agenda item. We're going to, and we do this all the time, is to talk over the safety group, a reminder of the legal responsibilities for employers, talk a little bit about general and workplace training, and then talk about safety work procedures, and we'll review the safe work procedure that we've developed for ergonomic assessments. And then we'll remind you where to find this type of information on the CWPCA website. So this is a review, but with any time you're doing training in any way, shape, or form, you want to remember that the person doing it has to be deemed competent. So for example, I can give this training for the simple reason that I have a background in occupational health and safety, but in addition to this, I've managed disability management for a large number of employees for many years. I've conducted ergonomic assessments. I've had them conducted on my behalf with specialists. So, I have a familiarity with this. But a key thing to remember is that if you, as an employer, don't have any familiarity with ergonomic assessments, then it's best to hire somebody who does, because to do a proper one, you typically need some background in ergonomics in terms of a professional degree. So what we're talking about today is to how you as an employer can prevent those type of injuries. But if you need an ergonomics assessment done, I would encourage you to hire a specialist. And if anybody needs somebody that can come highly recommended, just contact me by telephone, and I have the names of a couple of people. Okay, so people who do the training are qualified through knowledge, training, and experience. The regulations around ergonomics are found in the general duty clause of every piece of occupational health and safety legislation across Canada. So every province has a general duty clause, and it applies to what we call unregulated hazards. And these are hazards within the workplace where the employer should have a reasonable knowledge of them and how they can be prevented. So in terms of training tools, so this tool is provided to give people typically at a management level or supervisors some understanding of ergonomics and what can be done to prevent ergonomic type injuries in the workplace. So typically the training that the association has provided employers is a safe work or a safety standard or a safe work practice that outlines written methods on how to do a particular task. And it's designed in a way that you can customize it to your own company very simply. Secondly, we provide a training package okay, that once again can be customized to your particular workplace. And it includes photos of workstations, forklifts in use, and typically what you would do is it's developed in a way that you can cut and place in photos of your own workplace. And in this particular case, there's no need for a competency assessment, but generally in any type of training, we provide a competency assessment. And then once again, remember that training records, which a copy is contained within the website of how to develop your training records. Anyone you train, you must document the name in both a signature and a printed format and the date that the training was given in order for that to comply with any legislative training responsibilities. Okay, so today when we're talking about ergonomics, you'll be able to understand the basics of an ergonomic assessment, how to use ergonomic assessments for identifying and controlling musculoskeletal disabilities, and how to protect yourself from MSD injuries in the workplace. And what you see are two types of workplaces. One is a fella using a skyhook to sort pallets, which would be typical in a recycling operation. And in the far left, you see a workplace where this fella is doing manual assembly of a block pallet. And you can see that it's designed where he has fairly good access to the tools. There's two different types of nail guns there. But we'll talk a little bit about whether that workstation in particular could benefit from some additional ergonomic improvements. So what are the risks associated when performing manual work? And in our industry, there's a fairly high level of manual work. And the main risk is the development of what we call a musculoskeletal disorder. And these are injuries of the muscles, the nerves, tendons, ligaments, joint, cartilage, spinal discs, blood vessels, or related soft tissue, including what we call sprains, strains, and inflammations. And here's a couple of pictures. So, you see on the left side, lower lumbar pain. And on the right side, you see inflamed tendons, which are typically referred to as rotator cuff problems. Very, very common in our industry, lower back strain and rotator cuff problems, because once again, our workers are doing heavy physical labor, and these are the joints that get worked or strain put upon them. What are some of the other hazards that workers are exposed to in our industry? Well, lifting with a bent back, which is fairly typical, is going to do some damage. Lifting away from the body, lifting and twisting, lifting repeatedly, or lifting items too heavy for the individual, all are going to be identified as potential hazards in the workplace. So at this juncture, of course, one of the things that everybody should be thinking about is, am I doing any type of lift training, how to properly lift in the workplace? And, just a very simple example would be you have a nailing machine, you've got to move a couple of boxes of nails from the storage area. Let's say it's a pallet load of nails. It's placed in position on the floor, and now you have to open a box and either dump it into the hopper, feeding your nailing line, or perhaps you have to bring a box of collated nails to a workstation to load into a nail gun. Does everybody in your workplace know how to properly lift that box of nails? Meaning, you crouch down, you use your legs instead of your back, you lift, keeping the box close to your waist, you move your feet when you turn. So if that type of training isn't being done in the workplace, I'd strongly suggest that you start thinking about doing that type. It's very basic, but it's fundamental to preventing those type of injuries that you see in front of you. So the stressors, the ergonomic stressors, and through this you'll start to learn a little bit of the language that either would be using in terms of discussing how an injury is incurred in the workplace. So, a doctor might have a description of a type of work done in a workplace where he would identify repetition, okay, so constant movement of the same type over time as a particular stressor on the body. Or they could comment about the force. So it's the muscular effort exerted to produce force in the workplace. So an example of force would be in a manual repair operation. Maybe you're using a pry bar to remove damaged deck boards. That requires a significant amount of force to pry that board out of the stringer and remove those nails. So that's what they're talking about in terms of force. Another example of force is if you're using a nail gun and you're using your finger to engage the nail gun. There's a fair amount of force constantly using that nail gun on that finger. So a typical type of injury in the workplace for somebody that's been doing this for a long time is what we call white finger, or instant use of the finger develops in a typically forceful engagement will cause a severe stressor on the finger and damage the ligaments in that index finger. Extreme postures. So extreme postures talk about posture that's not ideal. So if you think back to those earlier pictures where you saw that fellow reaching across, trying to nail a board that's, far over, that reaching motion, that's not normal for a body. And that's going to cause some stressors on the lower back. Another example are static postures, where the body's not moving, but you're still doing work. And an example of that would be fairly typical on let's say a nailing line, where you have somebody that's feeding boards into a nailing machine. So they're standing there, and they're there for basically 7 hours a day, standing in one static position, twisting their body, putting the boards onto the nail line. And that what we would call a static posture, where there would be a fair amount of stressors put on the lower back and the legs. Another example that we often see in the workplace, in particular our workplace, is where there's pressure from resting either part of the body or perhaps an arm on a sharp edge. So, an example of that is around a work table. So let's say you have a work table, it's square, and you're using your body to either hold down a pallet or pry a board off, but you're leaning up against a sharp edge on around a square repair table. That's an example. So some of our more advanced manufacturers and repair shops, what you'll see is they've eliminated that in the workplace, and they've gone to round tables so that there's not that square edge that can potentially damage your, part of your body. Another good example to try and illustrate how contact pressure can cause problems is in an office setting, where a lot of the desks that people work from and the keypads, they're up against the sharp edge of the desk, and it causes strain on their wrists. So somebody in an office setting that's doing repetitive work around a computer can develop a repetitive strain type injury in their hands because of the sharp edges around the desk area. And then the last ergonomic stressor is vibration. So in our workplace, there's a significant amount of vibration. And I'll give you a couple of illustrations. We already talked about the nail gun. Okay, so that nail gun, as you engage it, as it drives that nail into the board, that impact travels from the gun into the hand all the way up into your lower shoulder. So somebody that's using a nail gun day in, day out, they're going to have significant vibration. Other people are using perhaps what we call sawzalls, which are used to dismantle like a block pallet, for example. And those sawzalls, once again, transmit significant amount of vibration through the arm, up into the elbow, and to the upper part of the body. But there's other examples of vibration. A good example is a forklift driver. So inside the facility, you usually have a concrete floor, maybe a few cracks in it, but nothing that's too serious. However, as soon as he goes out into the yard, he's faced with a lot of potholes or perhaps ice or just an ungraded yard, and that vibration, okay, bouncing up and down in the seat on the forklift can also cause a significant amount of strain on the lower back. So these are the typical stressors that are causing damage in the workplace. So in terms of what the responsibilities are for an employer, so your responsibility as an employer, and I'm talking to the individuals that are on the call today, are to identify those risk factors that exist in the workplace and expose workers to musculoskeletal disorders. So that's a fairly well-defined responsibility. And, any time that the Ministry of Labor would be investigating your facility, they might quite easily identify those type of risk factors in the workplace. I'm familiar with somebody that processes about 4,000 and 5,000 pallets a week, and was told that his employees were lifting pallets with a frequency that exceeded the standards in the province of Ontario, and he was told to put in what we call scissor lifts and elevating devices to the tune of about $150,000 to comply with the work order. But he had, if you can envision it, workers sorting pallets manually, lifting them up, putting them into categories, and the ministry came in and said, based on the fact that at 7 hours the pallet weighs 60 pounds, somebody's sorting, a pallet roughly every 30 seconds to a minute, the lifting capacity of that individual exceeds the ergonomic standards in the province of Ontario. Therefore, you have to modify the workplace and put in equipment and work practices that bring down that threshold of activity. The management responsibilities are to ensure that economic hazards in the workplace are identified and controlled, and it's your responsibility to provide employees with the appropriate equipment and training. So those are well documented in every provincial jurisdiction, and if that's a surprise to you, then this training is going to certainly be of benefit. For the employees, though, they have some specific responsibilities enshrined in legislation as well, and that is to use the equipment provided, follow the safe work practices. Also, they're responsible for reporting hazards and any ergonomic stressors and MSD symptoms as soon as they're recognized. So this is a very important bit of how you control ergonomic type injuries in the workplace. And that is in your orientation training with new employees, what you should be saying to them is, look, if you have a pain, you develop a severe pain in your lower back, and it's right after lunch, we want you to bring that forward to your supervisor. And the purpose of that is that if you've done something and you've injured yourself, the best thing you can do at that time is get some rest, okay? Put an ice pack on it, deal with it immediately. Therefore, it's incumbent on the management team to make sure that the supervisors are aware of that and can deal with it appropriately. The last thing you want to do is encourage the employee to keep working when he feels pain, because that will aggravate the existing condition and most likely make the injury worse. So in my experience, a lot of my training around this and what I advised management teams to abide by is that if somebody feels pain, and the type of pain you can describe, like a shooting pain going up the back, or a burning sensation in the shoulder, bring it forward to the supervisors and make sure your supervisors understand that they want to accommodate that individual with an ice pack or a little bit of rest, a 20-minute rest period. My experience got abused once in a while, but in general it didn't happen a lot, but it certainly was a key part of the programs that we used to prevent what was a small bit of relatively small injury from developing into a very serious one. So encourage your employees that if they have a problem, bring it forward. So what we have is a physical demands analysis for a skyhook position. So a skyhook, for those that aren't familiar with this type of equipment, is used quite often in pallet sortation facilities where they're sorting through white pallets. And here's an example of one, and we'll have one posted to the website. But I've just shown you the first couple of sections of it. But the physical demands analysis is a description of the work setting, the objectives, an outline of the duties, and the work involved in completing those duties. And we'll delve into that in a few minutes. So the ergonomics assessment, as you see, documents the job title. It's based on observations of the worker performing the task. And typically this is done with somebody with some knowledge who's gone, for example, through this type of training. But more importantly, it's done with your Joint Health and Safety Committee. So this is one of the, in my experience, one of the key opportunities for the Health and Safety Committee to be engaged in injury prevention, where the two of you, a rep from the Health and Safety Committee and yourself, look at a job where you have a sense that perhaps this is causing some injuries into the workplace, and using the tools provided, start looking at areas where you can either change how the process is being done, add new equipment, put in limitations. For example, rotate the job every 2 to 4 hours that will prevent injuries from occurring. So, it's an examination of the current process, and then bringing in recommendations that can improve upon it. And usually it's marked on some type of worksheet. So we'll get to that in a few seconds. But included in the Safe Work Standard is a link to a very good tool that you can use to do these type of assessments, and we'll get into that in a few seconds. So on the worksheets, let's see if I can dig those worksheets up, just to give you an example. There's one right there. So this is an excellent tool that talks about how to do a particular assessment. So we'll just scroll down, okay? And here we're talking about the hazards we've just gone through, okay? Force, posture, repetition, and other types of hazards. We've just discussed that. Here we talk about getting the worksheet started. So you can see that it's just a very simple tool to get the discussion opened up, and it's not uncommon for somebody in a workplace to have very, very limited knowledge about ergonomics, but that's all right. Where do you really start doing the work is around this hazard identification tool. So this is this is something that you would print out, and then you would do an assessment in your workplace. So for example, pinching and gripping. Okay, so if you had a situation where you were, what's a good example? This might be a mechanic who's doing a lot of fine work and having problems with he might be suffering from some arthritis perhaps, or he's having problems closing his hands. This would talk about issues around gripping. Scroll down a little bit further. This is around force. So we talked a little bit earlier about lifting boxes of nails, okay, and prying boards off a pallet. But it also could be, for example, on a cut-up line where you're perhaps feeding in a 6x6 timber, and it gets jammed on a frequent basis, so you have to go in and either manually manipulate that 6x6 as prior to being cut up, and the lumber's heavy, and you're in there and you're trying to manipulate them with both hands. That's a really good example of a hazard in the workplace where you're trying to lift a piece of timber that's just too much for the body to handle. And then as you scroll down, pulling and pushing. So in my experience, where a lot of injuries occurred in the workplace was around what we call line jams. So I was with a fella just 3 or 4 weeks ago where he'd installed a kind of an inspection line, and what was happening was the line was jamming at a high level of frequency because he was processing both good quality and damaged pallets. And the individual that was trying to clear those line jams, even though he was using a pry bar and keeping his hands away from the gearing sprockets, was sometimes having to exert a significant amount of force to unjam the line. And he was doing this in a process where there was a proper lockout and tagout procedures, but still he was really having to use his full body weight to pry a pallet that had been jammed. This is exactly what we're talking about. And for many owners or managers of companies, they're simply not aware that this type of work is going on because they're not always on the floor and always seeing this type of activity. So this tool that you see in front of you is good because it flushes out some of these types of issues. And with a little bit of reading and comprehension and some study, any one of us could do this type of assessment. And as I mentioned earlier, my suggestion is that you do it with the help of the Joint Health and Safety Committee. This is where they're ideally placed to try and help you understand how the work is really done in the workplace. And then scrolling down, talk about, awkward, fixed posture, repetition. And, in our business, That's what's happening day in, day out. They're doing the same type of work, and that can lead to, strain on the body. And that talks about other types of hazards. And you see in there contact stress, working up against sharp edges, that hand-arm vibration, which is, your nail guns, your sawzalls. And there's other types of hazards, and that's certainly working in extremely hot or extremely cold or humid environments. So you flag those using the tool, okay? And then the next step is, well, what do you do about it? You've identified some concerns in the workplace, and typically you might come up with 6 or 8, issues in the workplace where people are saying, when I go into this workstation, I come out of it at the end of my shift, I'm really feeling sore. There's something about this that's causing some trouble. You flag those issues and you prioritize them. So what can you do about it? Well, once just get this back up here. So once you've completed the assessment, you start looking at control procedures. So, the type of things that typically that you would use to control issues with grips are, for example, you're using a 5-pound sledge in a repair shop that you see in front of you. You can wrap that hammer with anti-vibration tape, and you can provide your employee with anti-vibration gloves. Now, the cost of that isn't significant. We're talking somewhere around $30 or $40 for a good pair of gloves and the tape. But what you've done then is done 2 things. You've demonstrated to the employee that you're concerned about it, you're aware of the particular hazards at this workstation. But more importantly, you've demonstrated to the Ministry of Labor, should they respond to a complaint or do an investigation, that you've made initial steps to controlling, or to at least identify the hazard and controlling them. So, the second point then is that when you're purchasing equipment, you talk to your nail gun supplier and see what they've done to reduce the impact of vibration on their particular piece of equipment. Another, something that quite a few of the repair shops are doing, but also some of our heavily mechanized operations, is that they're installing tool balancers. You don't see a tool balancer in this particular picture, but certainly would benefit from one. So that's give you an idea of what can be done to control strain on body parts when it comes to gripping. And the next example, so we're talking about we're showing the exact same picture, and this is about pushing and pulling. So a number of things can be done. In this particular case, what you don't see is any mobile equipment. Everything is very manual. So one of the things that could be done is to provide, carts, okay, or bins that help reduce some of the strain around pushing and pulling. And what you see in that top middle corner is the board reclamation. Okay, so the boards that come off that repair shop, they've built kind of a cage to store the pallets, or the pallet boards, and the idea is that it's lifted up by forklift, so it avoids any strain on the employee either to gather up the boards or move them. That's what we're trying to talk about in this in this particular situation. The second ergonomic issue that we see is, if you notice that the new boards, which are on the right-hand side, are placed at waist level on a stack of which you see some block pallets there. Now that's a very simple ergonomic design because it prevents the employee from either having to bend down or reach up to gather those boards. It's presented to them at waist level, which is a good ergonomic approach to that workstation. And also you see the rounded table, which is, prevents the employee from hitting any sharp edges. So here we're talking about frequent heavy lifting, awkward lifting. Okay, so once again, the main issue here is that, in terms of a workstation design, this is, it's not too bad. You see the lumbar presented to the worker at waist level. But in this case, I'm presuming he's going to have to lift that pallet off his workstation all by himself. And I would say that's probably around 80 pounds, something like that. So this particular workstation would benefit, for example, from a tool to help lift the pallet. I would say that would be a fairly significant stressor on the lower back and the shoulders to try and get that finished pallet off that workbench and reposition it to the stack of pallets you see in the far left corner. So it's all about looking at workstations that are at the right level, providing supply of material at the right level to reduce the amount of bending and lifting that goes on in the workplace. So we'll show you at this juncture what a completed demand right there. Okay. So as a review, that's what the standard looks like. This is what a completed ergonomic assessment looks like. So you can see that it gets into discussions about how high the pallets are stacked, 10 or 12 pallets high, pushing the stack along the conveyor. It's a good description of the amount of work involved for the individual. If the pallet is stacked upside down, it must be flipped over. That describes the amount of lifting involved. Cleanup talks about other tools that are used, talks about safety equipment, and then it gets into a very well-described amount of force that it's involved in lifting a pallet off the floor to the waist level, from waist level when you're transferring. And this would all be done by a professional. This is not something that an individual manager or owner of a facility would be able to do. But this adequately describes the amount of physical effort required to do complete this work task, which is what we call a skyhook, which is a very familiar tool in the recycling business. That's an example of what a ergonomic assessment would look at. It looks at pushing, pulling, gripping, strain on the neck, strength classifications, and then at the bottom talks about how much weight is required, This is typically done by a therapist, usually an occupational or physical demands in a therapist. And then they look at the what the requirements are against the standards. And this one comes out of Alberta, for example, which uses a U.S. standard. So where these become applicable in the workplace is where an injured worker who has lower back strain, for example, is being reintroduced into the workplace, and ministry, like either workman's compensation or the Ministry of Labor, would require an employer to generate an ergonomic assessment so that they could figure out whether or not the employee could return to his existing position or whether he would be required to have modified work duties in order to return to the workplace. In this case, the employer would be required to provide one of these and pay for it on his own. Conversely, if he didn't want to do that, you can typically ask the Ministry of Labor to provide an ergonomic assessment of your workplace. My experience, though, that if they come in for one, they're going to typically come in for all of the workstations, so you may get more work than you thought you were going to get initially. Once again, I've done several of these for on cut lines, on manufacturing lines, on forklifts, on general repair work. So if you need some assistance in finding somebody who can do this for you, let me know, and we'll help you. Okay, so in terms of finishing up the presentation, then the job demands analysis can do a couple of things for you. It'll tell you that. So we discussed two tools. We discussed the simple tool that you can use in the workplace in talking to your employees, to observing the work being done, and use that tool to modify the workplace. And modifying it can be done on a couple of simple things. You can either introduce some conveying equipment. You can place boards, for example, at a repair station at waist height. That would prevent an employee from bending down on a repetitive basis to pick it up. There's a number of ways that if you put your mind to it, you can remove or reduce economic strain in the workplace. And that's around work methods. In some cases, though, you're going to be required to put in new equipment, and typical equipment used to reduce ergonomic strain are stackers, destackers, conveyor belts, new work tables, roller conveyor, drive conveyor, assistive devices like a skyhook. These are all examples of equipment that are being introduced in the workplace to take out some of the lifting and prevent ergonomic strain in the workplace. But some of the issues that you might not be aware of that can certainly prevent ergonomic injuries are the two programs that I've used extensively. And one is a stretching program. And the second is pre-employment medicals. So just to talk a little bit about both of those programs. The stretching program, if you think of a muscle like a elastic band that's in a freezer or in a refrigerator, when you start, if you take it out of the refrigerator and you start pulling on it immediately, there's a good chance that you'll tear something or it'll break. So in my experience in a heavy manual environment is a simple stretching program that lets the workers warm up their muscles prior to starting work is a good idea. And I've employed this myself at many facilities. It's interesting that virtually every Japanese plant in operation has this type of warm-up exercise at the start of their shift. And if you need something that shows what a good stretching program would be, I could certainly provide that. The second item is the use of what we call pre-employment medical assessments prior to job placement. Now, there's certainly a cost to doing this. A typical pre-employment medical would, run around $250. But the key point that I would make is that if you have a very, very physical environment, you want to make sure that the individual can do that type of physical work and has proper range of motion, and that you're not hiring somebody else's problem. So, for example, somebody that's been in a bad snowmobile accident, okay, is certainly going to have challenges doing manual repair work in our industry. And to avoid any problems with human rights issues or obligations for an employer to provide work in certain situations, a good best practice is to have a written job description and have employees assessed by a medical practitioner against those demands analysis to ensure that they can do the work, and as I said, you're not hiring somebody else's problems. So that is the introduction. There's 4 documents. There's the training presentation that we've just gone through. There's the example of an ergonomic assessment that we'll post to the website. There's the standard, okay, that you can use to describe your own process for doing assessments in the workplace. And in that standard is a link to a very effective tool that you can do a simple assessment in your workplace using that tool with the help of your Joint Health and Safety Committee to flag any hazards, okay, and to correct them. If there are any further questions or you want additional information, please don't hesitate to call me. I'm at the CWPCA office in Ottawa. Thank you very much.